Oh, good morning. Today's daf is daf Tzadik Daled. We are at the Mishnah, most of the way down on Tzadik Gimel on Bet, and we are in the 11th chapter of Zevachim. And let me share my screen, and we'll get started. So, what are we discussing? Is the halacha that is actually explicit in the Torah that if some blood gets from one of the sacrifices, from a chata sacrifice, gets onto a garment, there's a requirement to launder that garment. And we are in the middle of learning the various details that are associated with that. As we've seen so far in this chapter, the only blood that triggers a laundering obligation is blood that is kosher to be put on the altar. And as we pick up with the Mishnah on Tzadik Gimel and Mabet, we're now going to detail the type of garment for which there could be a laundering obligation. Meaning, it's not only, the blood could, obviously could get on one of the garments of a Kohen, and those would certainly be covered. But what about other kinds of garments? When do we consider something to be a garment? And that's really what we're going to be talking about in this Mishnah. So let's dive right in. So nitas al ha'or. If you get blood on some leather, on the ad shelo hushvat, before it was stripped from the animal, meaning that you have multiple sacrifices that are present, and some of the blood that was kosher to spill on the altar, to put onto the altar, ends up spilling onto maybe a different animal or maybe even the same animal. What's the story? Do we say that, well, that leather is going to eventually be used as a garment and therefore it's considered a garment already? And then we say, no, Eino Taun Kibus. If it hasn't yet been stripped from the animal, so there's still work that needs to happen to the hide in order for it to be useful leather, it's not going to
Rabbi,
require.
I can't hear you.
You
Are you
can't
on
hear?
mute?
No, I'm not on mute.
Okay,
Um,
let me check with me. It must be me then. I'm sorry.
no worries.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that you can hear me. Um, so again, so Ainotone, Kibus, so that's not going to require laundering. And Rashi helps us out here by explaining what the story is. So let's take a look. The Rashi on the Mishnah is 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 11 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi from the bottom of Tzadik Gimel Bet in the narrow lines. Ad shelo huvshat ein ton kibus. Taimam Farish B'Gemara. The Gemara is going to explain the reason, but now Rashi goes on and actually gives us it. De be'inan roi lekabel tuma. You need to have something whose work is sufficiently finished that it could theoretically be possible to become tameh below chasaron chisron malacha, without missing any work that needs to be done. So all the work needs to be finished. Obviously, if the leather hasn't been stripped from the animal, it's not ready to be used. And so as a result, that's going to not constitute something that would require washing. Mishahufsha, back into the Mishnah. Now we're last word on the second line of the Mishnah. Mishahufshat, once it does get stripped from the animal, ton kibus. Divrei Rebbe Yehuda. Rebbe Yehuda says that once it's stripped from the animal, it does require washing because now, effectively, you could just say, I want to use it as a blanket. And so, as a result, because you could decide to use it as a blanket and then the item would become tameh in its current form, Rabbi Yehuda says that's sufficient. Rabbi Lazar says that's not sufficient. Rabbi Elazar Amar Omer Av Shehushat Ain Ton Keepers. Even once you stripped it from the animal, it's not going to, you've skinned the animal. It's not going to require kibus. Why? And Rashi explains again. Connects Rashi on the Mishnah. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Av mishahuvshat. Kolzman shalom nitaken liokli, as long as you haven't fixed it to actually be a vessel, ain ton kibus. It doesn't require the laundering. De be'inan davar hamakabel tuma. It's not enough that it theoretically could be subject to becoming tameh. It needs to actually become potentially tameh. And so as a result, it's got to be that you've already made the decision that you're going to use this skinned leather as a blanket. If you haven't yet decided what it's going to be, and therefore you have not necessarily finished the work that's associated with it, therefore we're going to say that it's not capable of becoming tame at the moment, even though you could potentially make it tame without doing any further action. But it requires some further thought to make that happen. So as a result, because you haven't actually done that thought, Rabbi Elazar says it's not going to be require laundering. She'ain, as continuing on in that Rashi, last four words, she'ain mechusar afilu makshava. In or for Rabbi Elazar, not only does it not need to have any further action, but you have to not need any further thought in order for it to be subject to the laundering requirement. The Mishnah then continues with additional rules associated with laundering. So, Einoton kibus elamakum hadam. First rule is that the only place that requires to be laundered is the place where the blood got, meaning unlike, let's say, if a part of my body becomes tame mace, well, that doesn't work, meaning it's my entire body that's become tame mace, and as a result, my entire body is going to need to go through the process. That's not the case with respect to this laundering. With respect to laundering, you can just launder the place where the blood got. V'davar shehu roi l'kabel tuma, and now, as Rashi tells us, and actually, let's take a look at two Rashis here. The first elamakom hadam, v'lo kol habeged, and not the entire garment. V'davar haroi lekabel tuma, v'af al pisha mechusar machshava, meaning that it just needs to theoretically be possible, even if it still needs the owner to think that he wants to finalize the current state of the beged. Ubilvad shelo yehe mechusar malacha. The key is, continuing on in that Rashi, second to last line of the narrow lines, that it can't be missing any thought, any action. Excuse me. It could be missing thought, but it can't be missing any action. V'stama karebi Yehuda, and even though we had a machlokus at the beginning of the Mishnah, now that the Mishnah is giving us the general rules, it is concluding like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that even something that requires further thought in order to become tameh is going to be susceptible to the requirement for laundering. Okay, the roi lekibus, it needs to be something that is subject to laundering, meaning that it's capable of being laundered. And Rashi tells us, the Gemara is going to explain what this is talking about. And now the Gemara continues, Echad habeged, it doesn't make a difference whether the garment is made of some kind of cloth. The Echad hasak, it doesn't make a difference whether it's made of some sort of sackcloth, which is some kind of garment made out of hair from a goat. The Echad or when it doesn't make a difference whether it's made out of a hide. Te'un and kibus, all of them require the washing. The kibus b'makom hakadosh, and the kibus has to happen in a holy place. And what does that mean? First of the wide lines in Rashi, ba'azara, it means that it has to happen in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Ushviras kli cheres b'makom kadosh. And by the way, since we're talking about requirements that are mentioned in the 6th chapter of Vayikra, and in that 6th chapter, it also talks about how if you use an earthenware vessel to cook meat of an offering, you're going to need to break that vessel because we're worried about the taste that is going to be in that earthenware vessel that is going to now be extend beyond the deadline for eating it, and so it will effectively become nosar taste, a leftover taste, and therefore we need to break the vessel. Umarika ushtiva beklina koshes b'makom kadosh, and it has to happen in a holy place. You're not allowed to take it out of the azara in order to process it. Similarly, when it comes to purging and rinsing a copper vessel, and this is extended to all metal vessels, that if you were to use a metal vessel, you need to effectively cook out the taste that was absorbed in the taste. And that also needs to be done in a holy place. Zechomer b'chatas mikodshe kodashim. And this rule, now Rashi tells us what rule is that? Zechomer, that end of the second line of the wide lines at the bottom of Rashi. Akibus kai. This is specifically referring to the requirement to wash the garments, because when it comes to the breaking of earthenware vessels and the purging and rinsing of copper vessels, that is all going to be true for Kodshe Kodshim as well, according to Rashi. And so as a result, when we say that this is the stringency associated with the Chatas from other Kodshe Kodshim, that we're referring specifically to the commandment with respect to laundering garments that blood gets upon. So minahani mili. So now that we have the background of this washing requirement, the Gemara quotes a brisa that provides a basis for the debate in our Mishnah about the nature of garments that require washing. Namely, do we say that as soon as it theoretically could become a kabel tuma if you were to decide that it was finished, that it is now going to require washing? Or do you actually have to have had the thought so that it actually could be capable of becoming tameh? So minahani mili, how do we know that that's what the debate is? To Tana Rabbanan, well, we've got a brisa that the rabbis taught. Beged, when it comes to a garment, a cloth garment, ainly ela beged. I would only know that as a result, a cloth garment would require laundering. Now the pasuk says, there's a pasuk vayikra perek vav pasuk kaf kol asher yiga bivsara yikdash va'asher. Okay, so anything that touches its meat will become holy. The asher yazeh midama al habeged, and if the from the blood sprinkles on the garment, asher yazeh la tichabes, that garment that had sprinkled upon it needs to be laundered b'makom kadosh, in a holy place. So that's the pasuk, and now we can see obviously where some of the rules that we had are from. But now the Gemara is going to say, but the Gemara, the pasuk only mentions beged, which usually means cloth garments. So how do I know that it also applies to a garment, to other materials? So ainli ela beged. I would only know various cloth garments. Minayin l'rabos or mishahufshat. How do I know that even leather, once it's been stripped, also gets covered? Because Talmud Lomar asher yizeh leha tichabes. There's a generalization. So we essentially have a specification where it says al habeged, and it says asher yizeh alam tichabes. That the next words are that, and whatever it will sprinkle upon you, you shall launder. So that point is that it suggests a more general application of this laundering requirement, not only for a cloth garment. So Yachol Sha'ani Marbeh or Ad Shelo Hufshat. Maybe it should even include garments, the leather before it was stripped from the animal. So Talmud Lomar Beged. That's why the Torah goes on. Torah uses the word Beged in the first place. Ma Beged Haroi L'Kabel Tuma. Just as a Beged is something that is capable of becoming tamei, avkol haroi l'kabel tuma. So too, everything needs to be subject to becoming tamei. Divrei Rebbe Yehuda. That is the ruling of Rebbe Yehuda, and that matches up with what we said in our Mishnah. Namely, it doesn't have to be that it's able to become tamei at this moment. It just needs to be something that could theoretically become tamei if we made certain mental decisions about it. It requires no further physical work. It only requires us to say, hey, this is now a garment ready to be used, and then it will become capable of becoming tameh. Rabbi Elazar says, does a different kind of drasha. Beged, just as we had with respect to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, well, it's got to be a beged, it's got to be a cloth garment. Ainli ela beged. That only tells me that it's got to be some kind of cloth garment. Menayan l'rabo sak. How do I know that it also includes some kind of garment from the hair of a goat? That would also be included. V'chol minei begadim, and other types of garments beyond, let's say, wool and linen, which would ordinarily be covered in these by the term beged. So Talmud Lomar Asher Aleha Tichabes. Now that those words don't actually go together. It's as we saw already. It's Asher Yizeh Midama Asher Yizeh Aleha Tichabes. That's what the words actually say. So just skip the word. But the bottom line is that it is the generalization of whatever it's going to sprinkle on. And so Yachol Sha'ani Marbe or Mishahufshat. So I might have thought that we should even include raw hide after it's been stripped before you do the thinking. Talmud Lomar Beged. So again, same basic structure as Rebbe Yehuda, but Rebbe Lazar says no. The point of the referencing to Beged is not to say that it is theoretically capable of becoming tamei if you were to think about it, but rather ma Beged davar hamakabel tuma. Just as a garment is actually able to become tamei right now. It has to be something that is immediately able to become tamei. So ma'ameinayu. So what's the difference? Give me an example of something that is subject to washing according to Rebbe Yehuda and is not subject to washing according to Rebbe Lazar. So we'll give you three examples. So Amar Abaye, Ma'atalis Pechusa Mishalosh, that if you take a cloth that is less than 3 fingers by 3 fingers, so that is going to be the difference. So manda amar ra'oi, if you say that all you need to do is have that, as long as you could think some thought and then it would be capable of becoming tamei, well then it would require hamanami rai. This is also subject to that thought, and therefore it would be required to be washed. Why? Because the following. First of all, let's just note that something that is smaller than 3 by 3 fingers is pretty small, and therefore is ordinarily not going to be subject to becoming tamei. Unlike something larger, if you have a larger piece of cloth, it is subject to becoming tamei. But with this small piece of cloth, it is not by itself subject to becoming tamei. But if you were to think about it and think, I want this little piece of garment to be used as a patch, now all of a sudden, despite its small size, it now is capable of becoming tamei, and therefore, because that thought is sufficient to make this small garment capable of becoming tamei, Abaye says that's why that would be the difference. So again, Rabbi Yehuda would say it requires washing, because if you thought about it that you wanted to use it as a patch, it would become capable of becoming tamei. So even now, before you have that thought, if it got blood on it, we would say you have to launder it. Whereas, and why is that? Again, because if you wanted to, you could think about it, as Rashi explains, l'takin chaluko, in order to use it to fix your garment, essentially as a patch. And Manda Amar, continuing on in the Gemara, Manda Amar, Davar Hamakabel Tuma. And according to the one who says that it needs to actually be capable of becoming Tameh, Hamiyalav Bas Kabule Tumahi. It's not capable of becoming Tameh right now because it's not large enough. And it needs that further thought. So as a result, that's example number one. Example number two, Rava Amar Beged Shechishev Ale Litzura Ika Benayu. What if you wanted you have a beautiful jacket that you've just finished sewing together, and now you say to yourself, it's not done. I want to embroider this jacket to make it even more beautiful. Well, because you have that thought that you're intending to embroider the garment, it is not a finished garment, and therefore it is not currently capable of becoming tameh. So Manda Amar Ra'ui, according to Rebbe Yehuda, who says that all you need to do is think about it. So then, as a result, it's sufficient, because if the owner of this garment that is going to be embroidered decides, you know what, I don't need it to be embroidered, then all of a sudden now the garment is finished, and as a result, it's not going to require any further action, and it will be capable of becoming tameh. So manda amar roi hanami roi. It's capable of becoming tameh immediately, as long as the person thinks, oh, I don't want to do any embroidery. He could negate his thinking on this topic. And Manda Amar Davar Hamakabel Tuma, but according to Rebbe Lazar, who says that it actually has to be capable of becoming Tameh right this second, it's not capable of becoming Tameh, because you need to think that you don't want to do the embroidery any longer. So, and Rava gives a third answer. Now, the odd thing is that we just had Rava. So either it's Ika de Amri, that's what the Masorah Shas says, or there's an opinion that it should be Ravina. But in any event, we have a third idea. Utzpa techashiv alei likotza ika benayu. Let's say you've got some cloth with some loose threads that are on the outside. Now, usually you would trim them. And so as a result, you intend to trim them. And therefore, it's not going to be a currently capable of becoming tameh. But manda amar roi hanami roi to amar davar hanami roi, that this also is capable of becoming tameh, because if the person were to decide, you know what, I like the fringes on the edge of the garment and I don't want to cut them off, now all of a sudden this sheet or piece of cloth is now suddenly capable of becoming tameh, because it's finished. And according to Manda Amar Davar Hamakabel Tum, and according to Rabbi Lazar, who says that the item needs to actually be capable of becoming tameh, Hala Makabel Tumahu. It's not going to be capable of becoming tameh until you actually trim it. So Vahatanya, and we have, in fact, a brisa along these lines. Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Utzba shechashev aleha lekatza, tahora ad shiyaktziena. Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe says that if you have some kind of cloth that you're thinking, that you decided that you're going to trim it, it remains tahor, meaning that it's not even capable of becoming tameh until you actually go ahead and trim it. Okay, so that is this debate between Rebbe Lazar and Rebbe Yehuda. So now the Mishnah mentioned that when it comes to laundering, you only need to launder the place where the blood got. So the Gemara wonders, so ein ton kibus. So the Gemara wonders, mina hani mili, how do I know this? So the Tana Rabbanan, Yachol Nita, we have a brisa that teaches where we got this from. No, Yachol Nitas ad al miktsas beged yehe kola begeton kibus. I might have thought that if a little blood got on some of the garment, it would all need to be washed. Talmud Lomar asher yizeh. It's whatever gets sprinkled. Lo amarti lucha elamakom dam bilbad. That shows that only the place where the blood got, that's what needs to be washed. Okay, next rule in our Mishnah, davar shehu roy lekabel tuma. Then we said that it needs to be something that could theoretically become capable of becoming tameh, but not necessarily is capable of becoming tameh. And the Gemara points out what Rashi told us on the Mishnah, stomach Rebbe Yehuda. This unattributed statement follows Rebbe Yehuda. Okay, next statement, Roy Lakibus. We said that it needs to be capable of being laundered, and we said in the Mishnah that the Gemara was going to tell us what that refers to or what that excludes. And so the Gemara tells us, Lemauti Kli Davar Grida. It comes to exclude a vessel because vessels are subject to scraping. Meaning, if you get some blood on a wooden spoon, you don't need to wash it off, or a metal spoon, even better. You don't need to wash it off. You can wipe it off because it doesn't get absorbed into the vessel. So echad habekad ech ve'echad hasak. We said that all different kinds of clothing will require washing. So lamemra deor bar kibusu, and in that included leather. Well, that seems to be suggesting that leather is capable of being laundered, or a minhu. But one second, is leather really capable of being laundered? We have a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbos on Daf Kuf Mem Bet Amud Bet that seems to suggest otherwise. Haisa alav lishlashes. There was some garbage on a pillow. Mekancha besmartut. That you, in order to clean it, because this pillow right now is a cloth pillow, you need to wipe it off with a rag. So this highlights that how we can clean things on Shabbos. If something gets on your tablecloth, you can't wash it off, but you can use a non-wet rag to, a napkin, for example, to wipe off the part that's dirty. You can use it essentially to pick up the dirty thing that is on your tablecloth. Haisa shel, or if, however, the pillow was made out of leather, so the Mishnah says, no sein ala mayim ad shetichla. You know what? You can just pour water on it until it all disappears. Now we can understand this very well with a shiny leather, a leather that's sort of like a not suede, a leather that is, like a wallet kind of leather. So then, you can understand if you just wash it off, the filth will all get off. But that seems to suggest that this leather item is not subject to the prohibition of laundering. And so and why would that be? It's because it's not technically laundering to wash it like this. And so how in the world can we say in our Mishnah that leather is subject to laundering? And now in the Mishnah that we have in Masechet Shabbos, we say that it's not subject to laundering. So Amar Abaye gives us answer number one, lo kasha, it's not difficult, ha rabbanan ha acherim. Well, we have just a simple machlokes about whether laundering applies to leather. Tanya, because we have a brisa that makes that clear. Habeged v'asak mechabso. When it comes to a garment or sackcloth, then you do laundering for it if the blood from a chatas gets on it. V'hakli v'haor migarero. But when it comes to a vessel or leather, well, then you simply wipe it. That is the opinion of the rabbis of the Tanakama. Acherim orim, others say, and that's the opinion that was going to match up with our Mishnah, habeged v'hasak v'haor mechabso. No, you know what? We need to do washing for a cloth garment, a sackcloth, or for leather. V'akli megaro, and it's only a vessel that one scrapes. So kaman azla had amar. So now that we have this distinction as described by Abaye, so now the Gemara wonders, well, what about the following statement? Kaman azla had amar Rav Chia bar Ashi. Who does Rav Chia bar Ashi follow when he said the following? Zimnin, sometimes or many times, Sagian, Zimnim Sagian, excuse me, many times, Hava Kamina Kamei de Rab. I would stand in front of Rab. The Shachshivche le misane, and I would rinse his shoes on Shabbos. And now the implication is on Shabbos. So come on, who allows you to pour water on presumably leather shoes? Well, that's Karabanan. That's like the rabbis, because the rabbis in this Mishnah, in this brisa that we just quoted, say that when it comes to leather, there is no such thing as laundering, and therefore you can pour water on it. So Rava doesn't like this answer of Abaye and says the following. Amar Rava, Umi Ika Lamanda Amar Or La Bar Kibusu. 1 second. Does anybody truly say that leather is never capable of being laundered? How about the following? Vahaksiv. When it comes to the Torah itself tells us that leather is capable of being laundered. Vahabeged Ohashasi. This is a pasuk. This pasuk is in Vayikra Perak Yud Gimel Pasuk Nun Chet, and it's relating to the laws of tsaras that's on a garment. V'habeged o hashasi o ha'erev o kol kli ha'or asher tichabes. And the garment, even if it's leather, you're going to launder and see whether or not the tsaras disappears. So we see here that clearly leather is capable of being laundered. So as a result, Rava is going to try a couple of times to come up with an explanation, and either he himself or others are going to question that in order for him to, and then we'll finally come up with his final conclusion. So Ella Amar Rava says, Kra umasnisin baraket. No, there's two kinds of leather. There's soft leather, which we might call suede, and then there's hard leather. Ki pligi b'kushin. Where is it that the Tanaim are arguing in the Mishnah about whether or not the leather is going to be subject to the washing requirement? That's talking about hard leather. So the Ha'amar Rav Chia, and now what about that statement by Rav Chia? Zimnin Sagian Hava Kamina Kamei de Rav Uvishikshvi Le Misane B'maya, and then he would rinse the shoes in water. So Bekashin Ukirabanan, it's referring to hard leather and according to the rabbis. And so as a result, that's why he was allowed to do it, because according to the rabbis, hard leather is not subject to laundering, and therefore you can just go ahead and pour water on it. Now, don't do this in a practical perspective, because we in the end say that no matter what the materials, when it comes to clothing and shoes, etc., we don't allow you to just pour water on even hard leather. There's a debate about if you have a plastic tablecloth, then Rav Moshe says that that's okay. But the bottom line is, when you get to these hybrid cloth tablecloths, you have to be careful. But the bottom line is that when it comes to this understanding of Rava, we're now saying that the Rav Chia's statement is only when it talks about hard leather shoes, and it's only according to the rabbis. But Hadar Amar Rava then thought about it some more, and he asked the following: La milsa hidamri. It's not right what I said. Neku nema le lekra deki ksivan berakin ksivan. Because could it be that when the pasuk wrote that only that leather could be laundered, it was only talking about soft leather? Milo askinin bekli achsalginya haban medina sayam. Because we should even be able to talk about hard leather that's boiled and comes from overseas. And yet the Torah tells us that it requires washing. So how do we understand these three different sources? We have, again, the pasuk itself. We have the machlokes between the Rabbanan and the Acherim, and we have the ruling of Rav Chia. So how do we understand it? Ela amarava tsaras kevan de megufe kaparcha. When the tsaras is on the leather, even if that leather is hard, mechalchal it makes it soft. Umashvi le'rach. And it makes it like it's soft, and therefore it's going to. That's why we can say in the Torah that it's talking about all kinds of leather, and so as a result, every other aspect of Rava doesn't change. But the Torah is talking about all kinds of leather, and the point is when you have tsaras on leather, it becomes like soft leather. Amar Rava ikashali hakashali, but I still have a problem. I don't fully understand this, as Rava is working this out sort of in an oral fashion. Karim uksasos derakin inhu. Usually, pillows and cushions are soft, and yet Utanan, but we have the Mishnah that we cited in Masechet Shabbos, Haisa Shel Or, that if the pillow was made of leather, Notein ala mayim ad shetichla, you can pour water on it until it disappears. Now, again, the rabbis say that even that is prohibited, but our Mishnah said that it was permitted mid-oraisa from the Torah. Ela Amar Rava, so Rava gives another explanation. Kol kibus delesle kiskus. You know what? Let's involve how we launder things. When it comes to things that get laundered without scrubbing, lo shmei kibus. Well, if it gets laundered without any scrubbing, that is not called laundering. And so as a result, as Rashi tells us, lo shmei kibus, third line down on Tzadik Dalet Amabet, Hilkach notein alav mayim ad shetichala shari ba'or va'afilu rach. Really, you know what? Even with soft leather, because you don't need to rub it against each other, if you pour water on it, it will come off, and therefore it's going to be okay and not considered laundering. Ulakaman Parach, but one second, the Rashi points out that we're about to ask, Ihachi begenami kibus lo havi ella al yedei kiskus. Maybe you could, what about if you did the washing without any rubbing? Maybe you should be allowed to do that for other kinds of garments. But we'll see that in a moment. And now, if we understand that laundering means scrubbing, that rubbing it together, so then when we say Zimnan Sagian Hava Kamina Kamei Rab, that many times he would stand in front of Rab, the Shachshiche Le Misane B'maya, and he would rinse his shoes in waters. Shikshuch in Aval Kibus Lo. The point is that he's allowed to do shikshuch, he's allowed to do rinsing, and you just can't do laundering, you can't do scrubbing. Well, virakin kedivrei hakol. And if this is talking about shoes that are soft leather, well, that works according to everybody, meaning according to everybody. Even if you just pour water, that's not considered laundering. But if you were to rub, it would be considered laundering, and that's why he didn't do that with the shoes. The ibikashin, and if the leather of those shoes that Rab had was actually hard, it would fit according to the other opinion. And why would it fit according to the other opinion? Because the other opinion says that the leather is, because the leather is hard, that even leather that's hard could be washed, but here he's not doing any rubbing, and therefore it's not considered washing, and therefore it's not considered laundering when he pours the water on it. But one second, ihachi beganami. But now the question that Rashi pointed out we would ask is what is being asked right now. If that's true, why shouldn't we be allowed to pour water on the cloth pillow until all the trash gets comes off the cloth pillow? No, we can't do that because beged shir yaso zeu kibuso. And this is a principle that we have in general. The washing, the wetting is the laundering. And that's why you're not allowed to just pour. The people will think that they could do this, that they get some stain on themselves on Shabbos, and then they say, oh, I'll get some club soda and pour on it. No, you're not allowed to do that. That in and of itself is violating the Torah's prohibition of laundering. So Rava l'tamei, and Rava follows his reasoning. To Amar Rava, zarak suder l'mayim chayiv. If you put a kerchief in water on Shabbos in order to clean it, you're going to be liable for laundering on Shabbos. Zarak pishtan lamayim, and actually the Masoras Hashas adds the word zera. Zarak zera pishtan. If you throw flaxseed into water, you're also going to be chayiv. Now, bishlam asudar. We're going to analyze this statement because we understand the first part, and that's why we brought it. But once we brought it, we're going to understand the whole thing. So Bishlam Asudar, I understand why with the kerchief of it kibus. You're laundering, and that's why you're not allowed to put that in water. Elazera Pishtan my time. What's the reason that you can't put flaxseed in the water? If you're going to tell me because it's going to sprout, well, you could do the same thing with wheat and barley. So it can't be just that. So Hanach Islahu Rire. No, no. The point is that there is some kind of rire, is like some kind of mucus that is the translation that they have here. Some kind of mucus that allows the pieces of flaxseed to connect to one another. So as a result, and that connection to one another, we're going to see is going to be a problem. What problem is it going to be? Well, you have to stay tuned to see in a moment. So, nami. But one second, when you have raw leather, that also has that kind of mucus, and if you wet it, it'll all stick together. So, shouldn't that also be a problem? No, hasaka of Elisha. No, when you have something small like flaxseed and you get it wet, now all of a sudden it's almost like you're kneading it together. It's like you made oatmeal kind of thing. And so as a result, that's going to be a problem. Uh, but when it comes to the hide, that's something so big, it's not small and little that's connecting together, and therefore it's not going to be a problem. Darash Rava, so now associated with this, now that we finished, Rava makes a statement. So, and what's the statement? So let's take a look. So, mutar lechabes min al b'Shabbos. You can launder a shoe on Shabbos. Amrle Rav Papa Rava. Once Rav Papa says, one second, Rava, how can you make that broad statement? Bahamar Rav Chia Bar Ashi, Zimnan Sagian Ahava Kamina Kaimna Kamei Darav, Vishachshiche Le Misane Mabaya. That all he would do is just rinse the shoes. He wouldn't wash you launder the shoes. Shikshuk in Aval Kibus Lo. He would rinse them but not launder them. So isn't that contradictory to what you said? And of course, Rava recognizes his mistake and clarifies. Hadar Oki Rava Amora Ale Vidarash. So Rava got his projector, naming the person who stood next to him and would project what he said. He would say it in a soft voice, and then the person standing next to him would announce it to the public. Dvar Martin Lifnechem. I made a mistake with what I just said. Baram kachamru. This is what the rabbis say. Shech mutar kibus aser. When it comes to rinsing, that's permitted for shoes, but actually laundering is prohibited. And in fact, again, for our purposes, we generally say that even the rinsing, when it comes to shoes, would not be permitted on Shabbos. Okay, so now the Gemara said that the hakibus b'makom kadosh, that the washing needs to be in a holy place, the breaking of the earthenware vessel needs to be in a holy place, and the rinsing of the purging of the copper vessel also needs to be in a holy place. And what is that holy place? We said that is the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. So Minani Mili, how do we know all this? Well, we know the first one is pretty clear. The Tana Rabban, we have a brisa, T'chabes b'makom kadosh. The pasuk itself tells us that you need to wash it in a holy place. Shoshviras kli cheres minayin. How do we know where we need to break the earthenware vessel? So Talmud Lomar, kli cheres asher tevushal bo yishaver. That even and an earthenware vessel needs to be broken. So the and connects it to the prior pasuk. The prior pasuk tells us that where the laundering has to happen, that it has to happen in a holy place. And so too, as a result, because we're now connected to two topics, we'll also say that the breaking of the vessel needs to happen in a holy place. So Marika Ushtifa Bechli Nechoshas Minayan. How do I know that the purging and the rinsing also has to happen in that place? Talmud Lomar, Ve'im Bechli Nechoshas B'shula Umorak. That if it was in a vessel of copper, then it would need, you did the cooking, then it would need to be purged and rinsed in water. And so as we see, all three of them are connected together, therefore all three of them need to happen in the Azara, in the courtyard. Okay, so Zechomer, sorry for not scrolling, Zechomer b'chatas. So we said that the last thing that we did is this is the stringency with respect to the chatas, and we said that Rashi explained that what we were talking about is specifically the laundering requirement, and now the Gemara asks, V'suleika, is there no other stringency? Va'ika shenichnas dama lifnim. But when it comes to a chatas, there are some chatas offerings where the blood goes into the kodesh. Because for example, the sacrifices on Yom Kippur, or and there are others as well. So And so, bechatos hachitzonos. No, we're not talking about all kinds of sin offerings. This is the stringency when it comes to the outer sin offerings. So she'im nichnas dama lifnim psula. But one second, if you bring the blood of a sin offering into the sanctuary, it is going to be not kosher. The whole sacrifice becomes invalidated, and that isn't true with respect to other sacrifices, according to most opinions. No, so Rabbi Akiva, this Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva. Da'amar kol dam shenichnasu lehechol lechaper psula. Any blood that comes into the Kodesh when it's not supposed to go into the Kodesh and is being brought into the Kodesh in order to do some kind of atonement, that is going to make the whole sacrifice invalid. So all right, so that's not a specific thing for the chatas. Well, shekain mechaper now chayve krizus, but a chatas gives atonement for somebody who's subject to the penalty of karet. So doesn't that have a unique aspect and a greater stringency than other kodesh kodshim? Nah, bechadas deshmias hakol. We could talk about a different sin. Let's refer to the sin where you are asked to testify about a monetary matter and you swear that you don't know anything about it when in fact you do. And so there you're required to offer a sin offering, a variable sin offering, and that sin offering is maybe that's the sin offering that we're talking about. And if blood from that sin offering were to get on your clothing, that's the only stringency that applies to that sin offering. Shekain to una arba matanos, but even that sin offering requires 4 applications of blood on each of the corners. So, Rabbi Yishmael, we could say that our Mishnah is following Rabbi Yishmael. Damar kol hadamim tu'unin arba matanos. He's the one who says that when we say that you apply the blood in the 2 corners and it goes on all 4 walls, it's not that you apply it on the edge and it splatters on both sides, but rather you first do it on one side and then you do it on the other side. So you have 4 applications on all 4 sides. And so that's the same, that's very similar, rather, to what you have for a chatas, where you have 4 applications. So here too, you have 4 applications. But one second, al arba kranos, you still have 4 applications that are on the corners, whereas the applications that Rabbi Yishmael is talking about is on the sides. And in fact, you have to go to all 4 corners. There are only 2 places where the Kohen stands to do the 4 applications that Rabbi Yishmael is talking about. But when we refer to doing it on all 4 corners, it requires you to stand in all 4 corners and to make applications standing in 4 different places. Well, once you're going to give me all that, I'm going to come back to you and say, you know what? There's other things that you could tell me. You could ask about Va'ika Keren. You need to do it on the horn, on the top corners of the altar. Va'ika Etzba. You have to use a finger as opposed to some other method of applying the blood. Va'ika Chuda. And you have to do it on the edge of the corner. And all of those are additional stringencies. Elachad mitrei tulasa chumri nakat. Now, this is not meant to be specific. Rather, this is one of the various ways in which the chatas is stricter, and it's not all of them. And so as a result, when our Mishnah said that this is one of the ways, it didn't mean that this is a stringency. It didn't mean that it's the only stringency, but rather one of several stringencies. So we are up to the next Mishnah, which continues the rules associated with laundering bloodstains on garments. But for that discussion, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful day.